I'm so excited about my interview today. I got a guy who he been studying Black history for a long time. He got a PhD in it, so he write about it, and he got some maps he gonna show us. I'm getting even more sophisticated with my presentation, everybody. Watch out. I got maps on this one. It's called Strong Inspirations. That's the channel. I'm Anthony Brogdon. You might know that by now, but if not, I'll say it again. I'm the strong man coming at you strong. And I like to tell you, I come at you straight, no chaser. Please, not please, because if you don't do it, that's on you. But subscribe to the channel. Hit a like button on one of my videos. Hit a notification button, because if you've been watching a little bit lately, you know I put up more than one video a week. There's that much content out there. So hit the notification button, like a video. And I got a movie. I'm a filmmaker too. I came out with this movie in 2017. It took me 2 years to do it, right? I've been to 40 cities showing it on all this good Black history, but I put an emphasis on Black business, slaves who own businesses. I go all the way from the 1800s to the 1960s in my documentary. It's 75 minutes long, so before you go to sleep, it's over. Watch out. If you don't have a DVD player, it's on Amazon. You can catch it there. And then I wrote the book, because so many people kept saying, hey, I like what you're doing, my friend. Can you put it where I can read it? And I got the book out, and the book got more facts. It's got more facts. And some of the facts you're not going to believe, and I put the reference in the back of the book to let you know where I got it. It's called Black Business Book. Over 200 facts. Strong. Both of them are on Amazon. Go ahead, get a copy. And like I said, you know, this is what we do here. I'm coming at you. So I got a gentleman that he's sitting there smiling. He said, I'm ready to go. I got to get it on. I got to tell the story. And you're going to be shocked. You're going to be shocked. So gentlemen, sir, PhD, man, tell us who you are and let's go for it.
Thanks. That's a high energy level I've got to try to match there. I admire that. So I'm Ed Ayers. As you said, I'm a historian, have been for 40 years. I was the president of the University of Richmond. I was Dean of Arts and Sciences at the University of Virginia. And I guess my biggest thing that might give me some credibility with your audience is I got the National Humanities Medal from President Obama at the White House in 2013.
Woo!
Yeah, how about that?
Pretty good.
Yeah, it is good.
Yeah, did you give him a shake? Did you shake his hand? Something?
I did. I sit next to Mrs. Obama, and he put a medal around my neck. So it's all good.
That's pretty good.
Yeah,
that's what we do here. Strong, everybody. So let's talk.
You gotta believe me.
If you don't mind, and I don't mean no harm in asking you this.
Yeah.
But I gotta ask somebody.
Yeah.
How does a guy like you want to study Black history?
Yeah.
Can I ask that?
You can. That's because that's a good question. Well, my whole point is, so you can tell from my accent, I'm from the South. I'm from East Tennessee. So growing up, I was just one more white guy, you know, mainly white area, Appalachia. Then I went up to graduate school to Yale and suddenly discovered I was a Southerner. And it's like, okay. And, you know, so that was in the 70s. So it's pretty clear, if you're going to understand America, you have to understand Black America. And so my entire career, I've written, I don't know, 10 or 12 books. The whole idea is that you can't understand Black people without understanding white people and vice versa. And so that's what it's all about. My first book was all about crime and punishment in the South. And my second book was all about the origins of segregation and disfranchisement. And then my third and fourth books were all about the slavery and the Civil War and Reconstruction. And then this new book that we're going to talk about today is all about migration of Black and white and immigrant and Indian people. So my whole idea is I study the South and everybody in it, and Black people have made the South. So that's how I got into it. But it's an interesting question, because if we have white people, we don't have any white people studying Black history, we're both the losers on that, right? Yeah, so that's kind of why, but I'm always aware that this is not my history. I'm just trying to be a good interlocutor, you know, trying to tell the truth about everybody. So that's.
Do you have any kind of slanted view towards this, or you just tell it like it is, or can you put in your personal pieces to it?
I have a radical perspective. Everybody deserves to have their story told fully. That's all that I'm doing. And, so while I'm pandering, I'll tell you one more thing. So I got an honorary degree from Virginia Union, the HBCU in Richmond. And I was the only white person there, as far as I could tell. And they said, we're giving this to you because you tell the truth and people will listen to you. By people, they meant other white people.
Sure,
right?
sure.
So I just, there's so much ignorance and misinformation that I think if you have somebody doing his best just to kind of come to this with an open heart and say, let's imagine what it was like to be in their shoes.
Yeah.
That's really all I do. And I just try to be compassionate. It's harder to be compassionate to white people, frankly. Yeah. They're the ones who did so many of the evil things. And so there too, how do you be compassionate toward Confederates? Right?
And can you kind of fathom how somebody can feel that way towards another person and treat them that way? How they rationalize the things that they did?
Well, that's what racism is a rationalization for injustice that white people did to black people. And so the logic of it is, if I'm doing these bad things to you, you must deserve it for some reason, right? There must be some reason that I'm on top and you're on the bottom. That's what racism is. It's an elaborate excuse for white injustice.
I tell people, I don't think it's ever going to go away.
I think
it's going to get better, but never go away.
Well, I don't know that I disagree. I'd say this, though. I don't know. So I'm 68 years old. So I grew up in the segregated South. And I went to, I remember that colored only signs and all that sort of stuff, right? And it's not that anymore. Okay.
Yeah. Right.
So
I agree with that.
And I studied slavery and the Civil War and Reconstruction. Sometimes people will say, well, yeah, that Civil War, it didn't really change anything. And I say, no, in slavery, they could sell your children. After that, they couldn't. Okay. Yeah. Emancipation means something meaningful. Yeah. And so the temptation on one hand is to get too carried away and think that we're already getting ready to enter the land of Canaan. On the other hand, is to believe that nothing changes. Yeah, it's changing all the time, but I'd have to agree generally that when you realize how deep the roots of all this go. So you figure one way to think about it, 250 years of slavery, 100 years of segregation, and 2 generations since the Voting Rights Act. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, it depends.
I got you. Now let me ask you this: my question was when people feel this way, do they use all kind of tricks to justify it, even down to religion? Yeah. Isn't that kind of amazing? I mean, how you think of all these different options to justify the means?
Well, it just shows how desperate they are to explain it away, right? When you're calling on God as an excuse, you're in trouble, right? And that's kind of, that's what slave owners did. They basically said, must be God's will, that these people were brought from Africa to here for our care. Yeah. And in the meantime, we're going to buy and sell them and take them away from their mothers and children. So
as we get into what we're going to talk about, I got one more question, if you don't mind. So then there were sympathetic, slavery ended because of the majority people saying, we can't take this no more.
No, it didn't. Let me tell you how it ended.
Yeah. Let's go into that. And then we're going to talk about where people left. When.
Okay. So Abraham Lincoln wins with 40% of the vote, actually 39% of the vote, right? Now, that's because that's if you're including the white South in it. So the white South leaves and creates the Confederacy. That still means that 45% of white Northerners voted against Abraham Lincoln. And they did so in 1864 as well. So if you'd had a vote, white people never would have voted to have ended slavery. Abraham Lincoln did it as a result of the war. And the only way in the world that the largest and most powerful system of slavery in the modern world, which is what the United States was, could possibly have ended was it if the slaveholders tried to leave the United States. Otherwise, it could have gone on for generations, I'm afraid.
Really?
Yeah. So that's what the books I wrote about before try to explain how it could be that something that was impossible, which is destroying slavery that's worth more than all the railroads and banks and factories of the North combined, how that could be destroyed in 4 years.
Wow. Okay. Okay.
So, and then,
yeah.
So what that means is that the white people who did the good things deserve credit, and the white people who didn't deserve to be remembered for stopping the most important things that ever happened in American history, which is the end of slavery. It's the pivot of all American history is the end of slavery. And but most white Americans did not support it. And
I guess I gotta keep going, but that's because it was free labor and you didn't have to pay somebody.
Well, it's not only free, it was labor that reproduced itself, right? And so you have 4 million people held in slavery in 1860, and it's never been worth more as an institution, and the crops they grew had never been worth more. Slavery was never stronger than at the moment that it just was destroyed. And it was destroyed as a result of a war that white Southerners created in order to have unconstrained control over their Black population. So white Southerners had every reason to sustain slavery. It was profitable, but it was also, they were afraid not to. I mean, they said, what in the world would Black people do to us if we create freedom? Because there was every reason in the world to expect retribution, revenge. And instead, one of the most remarkable things in American history is that Black people said, we've got our own problems to worry about. we're going to take care of ourselves. You know, you white people just go, leave us alone. And so it's one of the great accomplishments. And I mean, here's the thing, and maybe this would be a kind of a bridge into what we're talking about. The Black population of the United States is the most successful post-emancipation population in world history. This goes to your work about business, right? With nothing, they create remarkable businesses in the South. Now, I'm in Richmond. Richmond, you got Maggie Walker creating a first bank. You got John Mitchell creating this newspaper. And there's a Black Harlem. There's a Black business, Wall Street in Richmond, like in Durham and lots of other places as well. And that's what freaked white people out. It's like, we've held these people in slavery for 200 years. And given the slightest chance they're making businesses that can compete with ours in a decade, we must have been lying to ourselves. So I think, the rise of Black businesses was one of the most heartening things that happened after emancipation, but it was also one of the things that scared white people the most. One reason you have Tulsa, right? You have these riots. Reason you have Wilmington. You have riots against Black people who succeed. And that's one of the many tragedies of all this. So as you can see, I'm a cheerful guy, but I say I get up every day and study the worst things in American history for a living. Wow. Because we need to remember them, and everybody wants to brush them under the carpet, but we're never going to make progress if we don't admit where we've been.
So let's go into that. As you said, that's the segue into what we were going to talk about in terms of migration.
Yeah, so let me show you this. So this is from, you can see that map now?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay. So here's how it works. So this is areas that are blue. It's where the population is declining. Areas that are brown, and the more they glow, is where people are being taken. So this is basically the migrations of enslavement. And this shows how between 1840 and 1850, people being ripped out of Virginia, where slavery begins, which is still the largest slave state. So there's more than 400,000 Black people sold out of Virginia between the Revolution and the Civil War. But they're also being taken out of the low country of South Carolina, a little bit out of around Nashville. But look where they're going. They're going into the Black Belt. And you know the South today, this is still there, right? Up country South Carolina, middle of Piedmont, Georgia, Black Belt of Alabama, up and down the Mississippi Delta.
Okay, let me stop you.
Yep.
The slaves first came, they came into Virginia and Hampton, and then,
right.
I mean, that's where the ships docked.
That's right.
They also were able to dock in South Carolina.
That's right.
Okay, and then I know this might not be talking about it, but they were able to dock also in Louisiana too, right?
That's right. You can see it growing down here. So this is 1619 that they, there's a monument that we're putting up to commemorate that. This is 1670s, 1680s coming into South Carolina. And then middle 1700s, they start coming to Louisiana.
Let me stop you there. Okay, yep. So when you start saying they first came in 1619, let's say in 10 years, how many slaves or how many Africans did they bring to America, would you say?
See, this is an amazing thing. The United States is a backwater in this slave trade. Only 6% of all the people brought from Africa to the Western Hemisphere came to the United States. 6. Think about that.
I got you.
Okay, they're going to Brazil and the Caribbean.
Right.
That's where they're going, right? So this is the only enslaved population in the Western Hemisphere that biologically reproduces itself. Everywhere else, people die faster than they can have children. But because there's no really profitable crop for a long time in the South, this is 200 years, of course, you see, after the first Africans are brought, they actually grow here. So by the time, as I mentioned, of 1860, 4 million people in slavery. So by that time, that's a third of the people of African ancestry in the New World, but only 6% came here. So the United States doesn't matter very much in the global slave trade, but it ends up being very powerful. So
did the slave owners do certain things to make sure the men and the women had sex, that they could have as many kids as they possibly can, knowing that they could use the kids as they grew up? I mean, or were the guys, was it more reproduction at the time or what?
Yes, it was. The Black population grew very rapidly. People have really argued they can't prove that there's not slave breeding, as they called it. But what it meant was that since marriage was illegal among enslaved people, they held each other to the bonds in their churches. But legally, a man and woman could not marry under slavery, right? That created conditions in which there could be lots of children being born. We were talking about Louisiana before. 90% of the people that slave owners brought to Louisiana were men, but the women they brought were teenagers, so they could have as many children as possible for as long as possible. Infant mortality was horribly high, though. And so, but to answer your question, there were no incentives for slave owners not to have Black people have as many children as possible. If you're in slavery, you have nothing else but the children to love. So you have every incentive to have children, right?
Yeah, I got you.
So those things would kind of go together, but so ask me another question.
And then the other question is, and then you got to add in the rape scenarios and stuff like that, producing kids also.
Yes, there's an alarming amount of that. Yes, it's
okay. So now going back to the map.
Yeah,
you got them in Virginia, you got them in the South Carolinas, so on and so forth. Go ahead.
Yeah, so let's go down and let's look at. Let's skip down to 1850s. And there's lots of other maps that we can show you here. This is one map that's interesting. Areas that are varying shades of yellow and brown, that's where men predominate. Areas that are varying shades of green and blue is where women predominate in slavery. What this shows you is what I was saying before. Here in the sugar districts, Louisiana, but also Texas, Alabama, they buy 90% young men and basically work them as hard as they possibly can. Most of the white people who own slaves only own 1, 2, or 3. And if you're only going to own one enslaved person, you buy a woman almost 2/3 of the time. For the reasons we were talking about before, all her children belong to you. They're your property. Plus, women, I think you and I would have to agree, are just more useful than men. Not only can they work in the house, but they can work in the fields, right? So what you see is that this is pulling Black families apart, is that the small slave owners are buying predominantly women. What this means is you're up in Virginia, where most of the enslaved people are taken from. These are men that are kind of left over. So, and you can imagine, you know, often I talk to young people and try to explain this to them. They can't really imagine it.
Sure.
Most of the times the slave trade is going to be people who are today high school or college age, would be when you would be taken away from your family, because that's when you're worth the most, whether you're male or female. So
now did the slaves mostly, were they able to live out their life to 60 and, you know, some older age, or normally the mentality, how you know, what was the death rate?
I would say that, you know, everybody back then lived a shorter time than today. I'd say the average age, lifespan would have been in the mid 40s. Yeah, so that would have been, it's a very young population, both black and white. What I'm showing you here is, okay, we saw it before. This is just 10 years later. Look how slavery's expanded into Texas, and look how it's expanded up and down the Mississippi River. You know, people talk about the old South. Well, at the time of the Civil War, most of Mississippi is about the age of some subdivision today. It's 20 years old, right? There's nothing old about it. And all these people, so, have been brought. Look what the population of the Upper South looks like. The slave population is being brought to the South and to the West. If you add all this up together, it's 1 million people. 1 million people are bought and sold in the slave trade. Okay, and so that's how today, if you go, you know, what I had a tweet stream, and what it showed is that if you look where the election is and who voted for a Biden, it follows a lot of this in the South, where black people loyal to the Democratic Party that oversaw the civil rights movement, right? But what we'd see later is that black people, as soon as the emancipation, which just comes 5 years after this, of course, they start moving to cities for safety, right? But they also keep moving to this area. Why would you move to Mississippi or Alabama if you're free? Because if you're a sharecropper and you get half of what you grow, you want to go to the best ground you possibly can. So if you can go to a part of Mississippi Delta where cotton grows so high you have to pick it on horseback at the beginning, you get half of that, you can actually make some money. And so what you see is that the patterns of migration after the war keep bringing people to the Deep South. And they stay there, as everybody will know, until World War I and the Great Migration to the North. Because the North will not basically welcome black people before that. So
say that again. The North did what?
The North, white Northerners don't welcome black people until they have to have them in World War I. You know, and so I can show you that real quickly.
Yeah.
That go to this and show you people what the Great Migration looks like. Most people imagine it's a big red arrow that goes up from Mississippi. I have to scroll through this, excuse me. But what happens is that at the first moment of opportunity, black people get the heck out of the South because it's going to take a little while for this to load. Because it is, you actually have a chance in the North, you know, for a while. Okay. A little bit later, excuse me for this. And so here we go. So black people start moving as soon as freedom comes. This is what I was talking before. See, this is after the Civil War. You see how they're still moving to the Deep South, right? Including Georgia, but they're leaving the Upper South. They're getting the heck out of Dodge. There, the people are going to the cities of the Northeast. But here's what I want to show you. Okay, this is the Great Migration. 1910, 1920, all the areas that are blue is where black people are leaving. Look how people are leaving that same area they were there before. The Black Belt and Mississippi Delta, look where they're going. They're going to all these cities: Detroit, Cleveland, Chicago, Indianapolis, Pittsburgh, New York. And so, but they're also going to places like Kansas City, Dallas, Houston, Oklahoma City. But look, they're going to Birmingham and they're going to, and that's probably Roanoke actually. Anyway, so you can see, here's the main thing I want to show in all these maps, is there's never been a moment in American history when Black people weren't doing everything they possibly could to advance themselves. Given the slightest opportunity, really within months, Black people who lived in the South by this point for 2 centuries are gone because they understand there's opportunities in these cities of the North. What's amazing though, is since 1970, more Black people have moved to the suburbs than moved in the Great Migration.
Okay. Wow.
And think about this. Since 1970, there's, for the first time in American history, there's a reverse migration where Black people are moving to the South.
Right. Let me go back to this. So now you leave in the South. Does that hurt the Southern economies without the lack of those workers, without the lack of them paying their taxes or whatever?
That's a great question. White Southerners say that here's what happens. It would have, except for the invention of the tractor. Because what happens is that all these people were sharecroppers. And so once these rich white, not rich, but once white farmers can get tractors, they just plow up all these little farms that sharecroppers have been doing with family labor, and they turn them into these big plantations in the Mississippi Delta that we see today, right? What happens though is that they start freaking out, because the white people do, because this pattern continues. This is the 1920s. You can still see Black people leaving. It picks up in the 1930s. That I'm going to show you right here. Look at this. Black people continue to leave. This is what happens when the boll weevil finally makes it to Georgia, is that people are moving to these cities directly above Georgia. So Midnight Train to Georgia and all those famous songs of Black music. Right. It's all about Black people leaving and getting out. And that continues through the 1940s and 1950s and 1960s. I'm going to show you right here. Yeah. It won't take long. Yeah. So this is Black population change. Okay, let's take a second to come back into focus. Yeah. This is the 1950s. Look at that, the same pattern. So think that this is 50 years that Black people, and you see they're moving to the cities of the Northeast, but also still Chicago, Detroit. 1960s, same thing. The 1970s, look at that. Starting to move to the cities of the South. And then a little bit later, you start seeing what we think of as the Rust Belt, and Chicago and Detroit. These places start losing Black population because. Let me
stretch it just a little bit more.
All right.
When they started leaving the South, how did they start going out west to Oklahoma and some of those areas? How did that happen?
Well, they go a little bit earlier to Oklahoma. And that's the reason you have Tulsa, the riot in 1921. Yeah. It shows they've been there long enough to already be successful business people, right? And they start going in smaller numbers to Los Angeles and San Francisco. That really picks up in World War II, when the defense industry begins to build and so forth. So that's when you see Black migration really taking off in those areas. But Black people have been moving to everywhere in the South, everywhere in the country that they could since freedom. So this is 1980 to 1990, to answer your question. So you can see all the growth of Black population in Los Angeles, right, San Francisco, Northeast. But you can see Texas and Florida becomes the places that Black people go in, but they're still leaving the Delta, still leaving the Black Belt. But so I'd say if you add up all the places that people are going, and you still see in the 80s, they're still going to the Northeast. But look at Chicago, how it's starting to lose Black people, right? And look at Pittsburgh, how it's starting to lose Black people.
I got you.
A lot of them are coming to the West. But you can see all these cities, Denver, that are scattered around. So, how do you decide where you're going? Well, if you know somebody there, if you know somebody's got a job, right? And so once somebody moves to the West, then a lot of other people follow. Yeah. But If you add up all this, there's still more people moving, more Black people moving inside the South than are leaving.
Yeah.
So
Now,
the South has always had most of the Black population.
This is a funny question. Back in the, right after the Civil War ended, how do Black people leave? What's the mode of transportation?
Well, they couldn't leave until the early 20th century, and so then it's the railroad.
So they would let them get on the train to go up north.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And they would do it in very large numbers. Sometimes the railroads would subsidize it. The first industry that offers decent work to Black people are the railroads of the North. Starting now, so what happens? World War I starts. Immigration from Europe ends. So at the same time, you need the railroads and factories need labor to fill the war machine. They've cut off immigration from Europe. And so they have no choice but to give Black people a chance. And as soon as they do, Black people take advantage of it. And that's why we have Harlem in the 20s, right? That's why we have the birth of the blues in Chicago. It's because this migration of Black people to those places. But why you'd have jazz in St. Louis, right? Now all that's a result of Black migration. Okay. And it's in the last 100 years. So I think when people picture Black history, they need to set it in motion. All too often, it's a picture of somebody sitting on a front porch in Mississippi or something, right? Instead, it's people moving whenever they have the chance.
And let me have one more question as we kind of come to a close, I guess.
Okay.
Now, the Indians actually owned slaves, and then, from what I gather, took their slaves to Oklahoma and those places. Is that?
Yeah.
Am I saying that right?
You are, but about 3,000 enslaved people were taken by the American Indians to Oklahoma. 3,000 to 6,000. Yeah.
How did the Indians get slaves?
Well, they bought them.
The Indians weren't considered brown people themselves or something like that?
They were, but there were a lot of people who were mixed with white people, and a lot of people who were Christian. And so you need to remember, at the time of all this begins, that Native populations own 25 million acres of what becomes the South. 25 million. So here's the story. White Southerners say, if you'll be like us, we'll leave you alone. So American Indians, especially the Cherokee, Choctaw, adopt English, adopt Christianity, adopt slavery, and then the white people still drive them out. But when they do drive them out, there are several thousand enslaved Black people who are taken with them to Oklahoma.
And that's the Great Migration.
No, the Great Migration is 20th century.
No, that's 20th century. Okay.
Okay. So what you're talking about is what's usually called Indian removal, right? That's the 1830s. So 90 years between when the Indians are driven out of the South into Oklahoma, and then another 9 years, then in between the Civil War, and then World War I. And when World War I comes, that's the Great Migration. But as I'm showing you, there's always been migration. 1 million people being moved in slavery, what we call forced migration. And then they're move as quickly as they can to cities after emancipation. And then they move to the North when they can. And now they've moved back to the South. If you want to add up the 4 big movements, that's what they are.
I got you. Is there a question that I haven't asked you? Something that another comment or something as we come to?
No, I've worked them all in. You give me a chance. We covered 200 years here.
Okay.
But the point is that you can't understand America without African American history. So you're doing a great thing. I appreciate the opportunity to be on your show.
Thank you.
We have a lot more to learn.
Yes.
And it has to begin with honesty. So
yes.
Thanks for giving me a chance to come on and talk with you.
Thank you. Well, hey, everybody. I told you he got pictures. He showed us pictures. He got graphs. That's how we're growing here at Strong Inspirations. I don't tell it. I act like the other people know it, and they do know it. And I asked a question that I think you might ask. So please subscribe to Strong Inspirations. Buy his books. We'll put it all on the description. He got a bunch of them. He showed the one book that you have there. Oh, see, that book is thick too.
And it's
Look at
nice.
it. Well,
It's
that's a
got
hard.
it's got all the maps in it I showed you.
Yeah.
And what's amazing, well, let me show you. Let's see what. So, and with all this, and it's only $39.95, so it's a bargain.
I can afford
my
that.
pretty picture on the back of it.
There you go, good looking guy. Everybody, strong inspirations. Doc, I say to you, stay strong, stay safe, stay on your grind. We appreciate you telling and helping us know this story even better. Everybody, thank you so much for watching this again at Strong Inspirations, and have a great, blessed day. We out. Bye-bye.
So long, everybody.